Welcome to Film Independent Presents, a virtual edition. I'm Louay Khraish, Senior Manager of International Programs at Film Independent. Before we start with today's very exciting Q&A, I have to give some praise to our loyal supporters. Thank you to our incredible lead sponsor, the Hollywood Foreign Press Association, and our screening partner, Vision Media. And with that, I'm honored to introduce our guest for today, writer-director Jonas Poher Rasmussen. Hi, Jonas.
Hi.
Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. I've been wanting to watch Flea ever since I heard about it after it premiered in Sundance. And as an American originally from Lebanon, who left Lebanon during the Civil War, and as a teenager, and came to hear a lot of the themes in the film resonated with me personally. So I'm very excited to have this conversation. And thank you so much for bringing this story to the world to watch.
Hvad betyder ordet hjem for dig?
Hjem er noget, som er trygt.
Kaboul, les attaques des Moudjahidines repris.
Har du nogensinde fortalt din livshistorie før?
Jeg kan mærke, at der skal ske noget. Der starter jo min historie.
Your film is about your friend Amin, and the name is a pseudonym you two created for security reasons. And you met each other at school in the 90s in Denmark. When did you start realizing that you wanted to make a film about Amin?
Making of the film came quite late, but, I was always curious about his story because, as you said, he arrived to my little Danish village when I was 15 years old, and he came all by himself and stayed in foster care with a family just around the corner from where I lived. And I, of course, was curious already back then about why and how he had come, but, he just didn't want to talk about it. And then from there, a friendship kind of grew, and it just wasn't a part of our conversation, but, the curiosity was there. And then I have a background in radio, and 15 years ago, I asked him if I could do a radio documentary about his story. And he said no, and he said that he didn't feel ready. But he also said that he knew that he would have to share the story at some point. And when he felt ready, he would like to share it with me. And so I kind of had it in the back of my head that this was something we could do at some point. But just trying to figure out, okay, what's the form to tell the story in? And then 8 years ago, I was invited to this workshop in Denmark called Anidux, where they combine animators and documentary filmmakers to develop ideas for animated documentaries. And I thought, well, maybe this is the way to tell his story. And I asked him, and this is 8 years ago, I asked him, and he said, and he was like, okay, but maybe this is nice because the fact that he could be anonymous behind the animation kind of would help him, because this what you see in the film, what you hear in the film is the very first time he tells the story. And it's not easy for him to talk about. So the fact that he could be anonymous and still have, control over when he's able to share, when he would like to talk to people about the story, was really what enabled him to kind of set him free to say, okay, let's try to do this. So it all kind of started 8 years ago with that workshop.
In documentary, you always want to build this trust between you and your subject, and with this film, there was greater risk because Amin was your friend. So were you worried about how making this film would affect your relationship with Amin?
Yeah, I think making documentaries is always it's always a balance and really like taking care of your subject. Meanwhile, also wanting to share a story. But it was really about, in the beginning, it was really about creating this safe space for him where he felt like, okay, but this is okay. So actually in the very beginning, for the first year and a half or so, the agreement was that we were just trying it out. So everything is recorded at my place. It was just the two of us. And the agreement was that if he felt like this doesn't work, he could always walk out and we would make the film and it would be okay. And also that he kind of he could always pause and say, "I'm not ready to talk about this yet." So he always kind of had this back door. And then, of course, when funding came in, we kind of had to look each other in the eyes and say, "Okay, but does this feel right for you?" And luckily, it felt right.
And you had Amin lie down and close his eyes and speak. And I mean, from what I noticed from the subtitles, mainly in the present tense, can you tell us why this approach? And was it only a recording, or did you also do video?
So everything is shot on video as well. And my animation director and the editor kind of had access to all the video material, so they could kind of, the animators could kind of pick like details from his expressions from whatever happens in the video and put it into the animation. But this thing that he's laying down and talking present tense and has his eyes closed is really something I learned when I have a background in radio. And one of the first things I learned was this way of interviewing. We have a tradition for doing radio in Denmark, for doing radio documentaries, and this technique is very common in Denmark. And it was one of the first things I learned. And it's really about, because when you do radio, you don't have an image, so you really need the subject to be very descriptive and paint a picture for you. So what we would do, or what the technique is about, is to kind of bring the subject back in a memory, in a certain memory. So, for example, in the beginning of the film, he's in his childhood home in the garden with his siblings. And then I would ask him about the location. What do things look like around you? And I would ask him, what does the garden look like? What kind of plants are there? What are the colors you see? What does the house look like? What do you see outside the walls? And all this, would give us, the animators, a lot of material that they could kind of work from, but it also brought him back to the specific situation, and made him kind of relive it. And it generated new memories. And all of a sudden, he would remember details that was very, it feels very present, like in his voice. You sense the presence in his voice in another way than if you could just do like, a headshot of him retelling the story.
I noticed also, I mean, the animation was very moving, especially when Amin went silent, when he was contemplating. Even though the image didn't necessarily move, but because of the sound, everything was turned up. His breathing, shifting in his seat or on the bed where he was lying, or even in the flashback, everything was. And was that from your experience working in radio? Because it also reminded me a little bit of like the sound I hear in good podcasts, like where all the sound is so intensified for us to know where we are.
Yeah, but definitely, because this film in its core is a documentary, and I thought there was so much, detail in just his voice and how he kind of made little breaks and, little expressions that you hear in just, a sigh or something. So it was important for me to kind of really nourish this in the sound design. So you had a feeling that beneath the animation, there's a real person lying, and you need to feel that throughout the film.
The animation was hand-drawn, rotoscoping. I don't know if I'm correct.
No, it's not rotoscope. It is hand-drawn to the animation. But they had access to the interviews, so yes. It's all based on video footage. But they didn't put yes. video footage underneath and drew it on top of it. They drew it in hand. And then they could always, take references from the video recordings and put it into the animation.
And the other thing that I noticed that was very interesting was that you usually in documentary films, it's the other way around, where we use animation to reenact scenes that we don't have footage of. But for you in your film, it was reversed, and you used the live action archival footage. Interjected here and there, very strategically, but like very impactfully. Can we talk about the decision behind using this live action and not also animating this footage?
Yeah, but again, because it's in its core as a documentary, I thought it was important to remind people throughout that the reason we hear the story, the reason Amin is pushed out of Afghanistan is for historical reasons, and we need to see that. We need to see that all these things happening to him is because of things that happened in our world, in the real world. And also, again, we use a lot of the archive as reference for the animation. So we would have, we would do a lot of research finding archive footage from Afghanistan in the 80s. And then, we would see things and it would take directly from the archival footage and animate it and put it into the animation as well. So it felt like it kind of, we could go from one thing to the other seamlessly and just so it felt connected. But it was really important to me that to remind people throughout that this is a real story. It's a real person. It's not fiction.
Yeah, I thought it was really impactful, and especially the scenes from Afghanistan prior to the Taliban or the Mujahideen rule. I thought that was really interesting and important to show also, especially in the West, how society changed for this family, or how the situation in their country changed, so that it became so unbearable they had to leave. You also chose a nonlinear storytelling, going from the past to the present. Can we talk about this approach as well? And I had some feelings why, but I would love to hear your thoughts on that and why you chose a nonlinear storytelling.
Yeah, of course. But this film is really also about how it affects a person to not being able to share his story. So this going back and forth in time, like we have the present day where he slowly, opens up. And I really wanted to show how, he slowly came to terms with his past and how it changed him. So going back and forth and see how he struggled in his relationship with his partner in Denmark. At the same time, you see his story kind of unfolding. And both stories are kind of similar. They're both stories about finding a home. So it felt like when I started doing the film, they were accidentally, luckily, trying to find a house, and it really mirrored the story of a young man having to flee his home in Afghanistan and going to search for a new place. So it felt very natural to kind of combine these two stories because they are fundamentally about the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it did do that, and it reflected how for children who grew up in war or are refugees, the past is never gone. It's always lingering in the past and kind of affects what our decisions and how we interact with the world in the present. But it also, in a way, reflected Amin's cultural intersectionality, where he, throughout the film, maybe until the end, you don't feel that he's completely in the present, right? So, and then the way you approach the film with him laying down, I felt it was really as if he is, going through a self-therapy, right? To face that past and see how he can live in the present.
Yeah, and I didn't realize this, going in. For me, this was a technique of interviewing, but I didn't know what he was carrying around, when we started. So he himself said at the very first interview, he told me, I actually don't care if this film is going to be made. To me, it's therapeutical just to share my story. So I didn't realize till we actually got started that this was the situation for him. And I didn't know all this that he was carrying around and how much it affected him in every day of his life. So it really, to me, in the process of making the project, it really grew from being one thing, from being me really wanting to know his secret, and then to see, okay, but this is really something he carries around in everything he does in his life.
Because I mean, the film has these themes of family, survival, sacrificing for the family. The definition of what is home or where is home, but but it is a double coming out story, right? In the film, we learn how he came out as a gay man to his family, and we'll talk about this in a second, because it's really interesting. But also coming out to you and the world about the secret that he's held So it's really interesting. And then, coming out to his family, I mean, LGBTQ films, especially about coming out, often in documentary at least, are about, oppression and getting out of this oppression as a gay man. And the way you tell Amin's coming out story or coming of age as a young gay man or young gay boy, it's heartbreaking, but it never feels exploited. It always feels like a celebration of your friend. And I mean, how cautious were you of because it felt very succinct, and there's just these elements that without really exploiting it and making it melodramatic. I don't know. Can we talk a little bit how, and this is your second film with a gay subject matter too, because I believe what he did, and then also what attracts you to telling stories from the LGBTQ community?
First of all, Amin came out to me when he was 16. So to me, that was like a natural part of his story, that he was gay. And I wanted to feel that way in the film as well. But then, in the process of making the film, I realized that it, as you said, it's a double coming out story. And that this story of him having to hide his sexuality for all his youth is kind of the same thing as when he arrived in Denmark. He had to hide his past. He couldn't talk. There's always been a part of him that he couldn't talk about. So these stories really intertwined, and I realized that while doing the film. But him being gay was never. It just felt natural, and I wanted it to feel the same in the film. It's just a part of his personality. What draws me to these kind of stories? I think I've always had an interest in marginalized people. So whether it's a refugee or a gay person or whatever marginalized people around the world, I have a sincere interest in how people cope and what people do to kind of deal with and trying to break out of being marginalized. So that's that. I think I don't have a specific interest in LGBTQ stories. I just happen to have done 2 in a row. But it's really about marginalized people where I'm interested to see how people cope.
More and more, we realize that the importance of people from underrepresented communities telling their own stories. Were you worried in today's climate to tell a story about gay Muslim refugee from Afghanistan? And was that the reason for telling us so early on your personal connection to Amin? I think in the first 10 minutes you established this very personal connection to the subject.
No, but I think to me, I never had an intention to do a refugee story or an Afghani story. It was always a story about my friend and a friendship, and that was kind of what started the whole thing. And this thing about having a close friend where he has a secret, something he doesn't talk about, and how that affects a relationship. That was kind of where it started. So I really had a feeling that, okay, but of course, then the project changed. Then we had the refugee crisis in Europe in 2015. And also I thought, okay, but this is also about, giving refugees a human face. Because a lot of the time refugees are described only by what they need. They need something. But here, because it's told from within a friendship, I could give a lot more nuance to the refugee story. I could give, because, being a refugee is not an identity. It's a circumstance, it's a situation you live through. But you're so much more, and he was so much more. So really to be able to give a human face to a refugee story and let Amin kind of represent refugees in a way where you feel, okay, but they're complex individuals like everyone else. So it became increasingly important to me, but it all kind of originated from the friendship.
Yeah, and it's also for me, establishing this early on also made me realize that, you know, stories of refugees in Europe or in Denmark, as in this case, also you're telling us that how it affected you as a person meeting, I mean, and how that changed you as a person, learning about, you know, the world outside your, you know, very safe and idyllic village. So in Denmark. So I thought that was really important to establish. The other thing that resonated and depicted this really close friendship between you when you talked about Jean-Claude Van Damme and how you two had two different experiences with this movie star, and you know, some of these charming moments in the film depicting the innocent crushes that Amin had on Hollywood and Bollywood leading men. Why was it important for you to inject this humor throughout the film? You know, which is for the most part is very heavy and you know, emotional.
But you know, I think it goes from most relationships actually, that when you're able to laugh together, it creates connection, and that creates empathy. And I felt like, you know, because Amin and me, we laugh a lot together. So it had to be in the film, and I had a hope that if the audience were able to laugh with Amin as well, it creates the same connection between the audience and Amin as there's in our friendship. So this thing about, you know, cracking people open by having them laugh with him and at him, because also, you know, he's flawed. He's lying for his boyfriend. He's not saying he's going to the States, and we as an audience see that, and then we can kind of, and that it just makes him more human and creates this connection where you hopefully feel empathy towards him.
Yeah, and it is universal, having crushes on movie stars and, you know, pop idols and so forth. So I I thought that was really interesting how you brought this in. And speaking about that, in cinema, a portrayal of a Muslim gay man is always about oppression, how hard it is. But the film puts this prejudice, which most people have about gay men and Muslim families, to shame. I mean, even for us as an audience in the West, when Amin's brother, after Amin comes out to him, taking him somewhere, I feel like in our mind, we were thinking something completely different. And then when it was revealed that he was taking him to his first gay bar, it sort of like forced us as an audience to face our own preconceived notions about Muslim families. I loved it because even though I come from Lebanon and I'm more familiar with Amin's world, you know, because Lebanon has a large Muslim population, I still was really surprised by that. Can we talk a little bit about writing that scene and why, you know, this approach to this scene?
But it's definitely, you know, I really wanted to kind of show the prejudice that's on this topic, but it really comes from Amin's own prejudice against his own family. Because the reason why he didn't come out early on was because he had these prejudices against his own family. He thought that they would cut him off. He thought that he would lose them when he came out. And I really wanted that to be a part of the film. So of course, I used the cinematic toolbox to kind of extend the suspense. Because of course, when Amin is walking down, you know, towards the gay club, he knew that it was a gay club because like his family had told it before he kind of went in there. But I wanted to keep this because I really wanted to display Amin's own prejudice against his own family and the relief that he felt when they accepted him. Me and the editor, we really tried to figure out, okay, how can we display this in this scene to make sure that you get the same sense of prejudice and the same sense of relief that Amin had when he finally dared to come out.
Another way that, you know, these preconceived notions that we have the challenge is with the soundtrack. At first, the original score by Uno Helmerson was hauntingly beautiful. subtle, but yet tugged on your emotions throughout the film. But you also use European and American pop music, like Aha blasting from the Walkman. Were these songs that Amin listened to? Um,
Yes,
I mean, I would
it
love
was. So one of the first, like actually the first interview I did, where I asked him to just go back in like to his early memories, the first memories he had. He started quite immediately to talk about this Walkman that his sister had given him, this pink Walkman. And I then asked him what music he listened to, and he started to talk about these pop songs that I listened to myself, like Roxette and Aha and Whitney Houston and Madonna and all these big star names. And I was somewhat surprised by that, but I really enjoyed the fact that or I could relate a lot more to his childhood because we're the same age, we listen to the same music, we've seen the same films. So just the fact that I really wanted to bring that into the film so other people could relate and see, okay, but here's an Afghan kid in Kabul listening to Aha, and like we all did in '84.
Yeah, exactly. And it makes this faraway setting seem not so foreign and relatable. The pseudonym Amin is an Arabic name popular throughout the Muslim world. In Arabic, it means faithful, but it also means honest. And Amin's journey in this film is to be finally honest and not keep secrets. Was because I know it's a pseudonym. Was the name choice intentional or coincidental?
It was I read up on a lot of Arabic names and kind of tried to figure out okay which one would fit his character. So it's definitely not coincidental.
Okay, great. I mean, for me, because I speak Arabic, it's I noticed that, so that's great. A British actor Riz Ahmed, who recently launched the Muslim Representation Initiative, which is a fund to support Muslim filmmakers and storytellers, and Danish actor Louay Khraish, people will know him from Games of Thrones, came on board your film. Can we talk about how they came on board and how did that help also the film?
So they came on quite late in the process, a little bit before the film premiered at Sundance, and it was really our sales agent idea who thought, okay, but it would be great to do an English dub version of the film. I was a little reluctant at the beginning because I think there's so much, in Amin's own voice, and we really, as we talked about before, I've really worked a lot on nourishing, the authenticity in the voice. But to a point, if we could get a story like this out to a broader audience by having an English dub version and big name actors on it, it of course made a lot of sense. So it was really about trying to find the good cast. And immediately, Riz was my favorite pick, first of all, because he's incredibly talented, but also because he, as you said, he fights for representation in film. And it took a while before we could get a hold of him, but finally we got the film to him and he saw it, and he was really eager to support it. And with Nikolai, it was a little easier. He lives like 10 miles from my place in Copenhagen, so it was about just getting a hold of him. But he also does a lot of work for UNHCR and the Choose Love movement. So he was really eager to support as well. So we've done an English dub version where Riz is Amin and Nikolai is me, and it's going to be out at some point as well.
The film was initially slated to premiere at Cannes in 2020, but because of the COVID pandemic, the festival was canceled. I believe there was still online version of it. But then Flea premiered at Sundance in 2021. And ironically, as the film began to screen worldwide and get all these accolades, it coincided with the American withdrawal from Afghanistan. And then suddenly, Amin's story was no longer something from the past. It was something that we were seeing in front of our eyes on the TV again. It makes us feel that nothing changes in this world. How has this experience, the success of the film, but then seeing what's happening now in Afghanistan, affect you and Amin? I mean, it's sort of like double, seems like bittersweet. but I'm not
No.
that passionate. Correct.
Yeah, no. It's just sadly relevant. I mean, I really wish it wasn't as relevant as it is. But to see there's the sequence where Amin and his family flee Afghanistan, flee Kabul. And me personally, I of course grew a close tie to Afghanistan while working on this film and working on that specific sequence for weeks and months, and then to all of a sudden see almost identical footage on the news was just heartbreaking. But of course, even more so for Amin. I'm in touch with him all the time, and he was very affected with everything that happened, and the fact that all of a sudden a new generation of Afghans are getting pushed out of the country, that's going to be in the same limbo as he was in for years, and not being able to choose their own path in life. And he still has relatives in Afghanistan who was in really bad situation. So it was a very difficult time, and still is. It's just heartbreaking.
The last shot of the film was very moving because you dissolved from animation to live action, as if Amin might one day to step out from behind and share. But it felt hopeful to me, at least for Amin's story. Perhaps he found home. Are you hopeful?
I'm hopeful for his story for sure. He's definitely in a good place now, and he really found a place where he feels at home. And Amin has been traveling a lot for many years, and then they bought this house, and he thought he was going to continue traveling, but as everyone else, all of a sudden he was stuck in his house, in his home for 2 years almost. But he actually really enjoyed it. And he sends me photos all the time of the flowers in the garden. So he's definitely in a good place and found a home. He told me that he can see himself get old there. So that's amazing.
I've been, a fan of Danish film and television series ever since I discovered Borgen. And every year I look out for Denmark's submission to the Oscars. And for Denmark, which is one of the smaller European countries, and I believe a population of like 6 million, has like 13 films nominated. And I think it holds the record with like bigger countries like Spain and Japan. And then just ranks a little bit below Italy and France, and you have had 4 wins. What is Denmark's secret?
I think there's different things. One is there's an amazing film school in Denmark, so the quality of the craft, like the editors, the sound designers, the DOPs coming out of that school, like the standard is just incredibly high, and they work not just in Denmark but around the world on films, and it's really specialized in nurturing the artistic vision of the different people in the school on different crafts. But also we're fortunate to have a funding system that supports films, not just big films but also artistic films, and support the new talents coming out. So I feel very lucky to live in Denmark in a system that kind of supports the arts in the way it does.
It works because we're always looking out to see what's coming out of Denmark, and Refugee is Denmark's Oscar submission to the international film category. There's a lot of buzz about it also being maybe nominated for best animation film, not only best documentary, but and also best documentary, and maybe even best picture. So I'm rooting for it. I wish you all the luck, and thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. I really love the film, and I believe it is going to be released in theaters here in the US by Neon and Participant on December 3rd. So make sure you go out and see it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jonas.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.